Ethan parked his car at the edge of whispering woods, the dense canopy casting shadows that seemed to move with a life of their own. The locals had warned him. Some whispered of disappearances, others of people returning changed, haunted by things no one could explain. But curiosity, that insistent itch in his mind, had won over caution. He had to see the cabin for himself, to uncover the truth behind the rumors that had plagued the small town for decades. The forest greeted him with an unsettling silence, broken only by the occasional snap of twigs underfoot. Every few steps, he felt the unmistakable sensation of being watched. He told himself it was his imagination, nerves fueled by the stories he'd heard, yet the shadows seemed to stretch toward him, bending in ways that defied logic. A cold wind whispered through the trees, carrying with it murmurs that almost sounded like names. His name. The trail leading deeper into the woods was faint, overgrown with brambles and moss. Ethan pushed forward, navigating through tangle and root, the fading light of late afternoon filtering through the thick foliage. Hours seemed to pass in minutes, and soon the forest grew darker, the air heavier. It was then he saw it, a silhouette through the trees, a dilapidated cabin half swallowed by vines and decay. The windows stared like hollow eyes, and the front door hung slightly ajar, creaking softly in the wind. Ethan approached cautiously. The ground around the cabin was uneven, littered with broken branches and dead leaves. Each step brought a strange hush, as if the forest itself held its breath. When he stepped onto the porch, the air turned icy, and a sense of dread pressed against his chest. The door, surprisingly, moved with ease, opening into a room thick with dust, cobwebs, and the faint scent of rot. Inside, remnants of lives long forgotten lay scattered, broken furniture, journals with yellowed pages, and strange symbols carved into the walls hinted at a history far darker than mere abandonment. Ethan's flashlight flickered, revealing the glint of something metallic in the corner, a rusted key, its purpose unknown. Then came the whispers, soft at first, barely audible, like leaves brushing against each other. They grew more distinct, curling around his mind. "Stay, don't leave." A shadow passed across the far wall, and Ethan froze, heart hammering. He spun, but there was nothing, only the empty room, silent except for the groaning of the old cabin. His rational mind wrestled with fear, trying to dismiss what he saw, but deep down he knew the forest had secrets, and the cabin was the heart of them. Ethan set down his backpack, determined to explore. He ran his fingers over the strange carvings, tracing patterns that seemed almost to writhe under his touch. Outside, the wind intensified, carrying the whispers deeper into the cabin, as if beckoning him further. Unseen eyes watched, patient and unyielding, as Ethan took his first real step into the dark history of the Whispering Woods, into a place where curiosity was the first step toward a nightmare he could never escape. Night had fallen over Whispering Woods, and the cabin seemed to grow larger in the darkness, as though inhaling the moonlight. Ethan sat on the splintered floorboards, the journal he had found clutched in his hands. Its pages were brittle, ink faded, but the words inside painted a story more disturbing than anything he had imagined. The journal belonged to Thomas, a man who had lived in the cabin decades ago. His entries told of shadows that moved independently, of whispers calling his name in the dead of night, and fleeting glimpses of figures that were never really there. Thomas had written warnings in a trembling hand, describing eyes in the woods that watched without blinking, feeding on fear until it became a tangible weight in the chest. Ethan shivered. Every word resonated with what he had already felt. A sudden creak upstairs made him freeze. His flashlight trembled in his hand as he turned toward the staircase, the shadows from the flickering beams stretching unnaturally along the walls. Every instinct screamed to leave, but curiosity and a reporter's stubbornness pushed him upward. On the loft, a large mirror stood, its surface dulled by dust. Ethan wiped it clean, and for a brief moment the room appeared normal. Then, in the reflection, a pale figure stood behind him. Heart pounding, he spun around, but the space was empty. The shadows on the wall seemed to twist and writhe, forming shapes that defied reason. Human silhouettes stretched and contorted as if alive. Downstairs, the whispers grew louder, forming words that slithered into his mind. "Join us. Stay. You belong here." Ethan stumbled back, knocking over a chair. The sound echoed unnaturally, as if the cabin itself were amplifying his fear. He tried to calm himself, telling himself it was his mind playing tricks, yet the rational explanation felt hollow. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. Time itself seemed suspended. Ethan saw fleeting images of past visitors, men and women frozen mid-step, their faces twisted in silent screams, trapped in invisible cages of shadow. The air grew colder, and every breath felt like inhaling the weight of decades of fear. In a desperate attempt to regain control, Ethan explored a corner of the cabin he hadn't yet entered. There, behind a rotting curtain, he found a trap door concealed beneath layers of dust and debris. His pulse quickened. Thomas's journal had hinted at a hidden part of the cabin, a place where the heart of its darkness might reside. He hesitated, hand on the trapdoor's handle. The whispers crescendoed into a chorus of voices chanting in unison, "Do not leave! Do not leave!" His rational mind screamed at him to flee, but something deeper, an insatiable curiosity, urged him forward. With a trembling grip, he lifted the trap door and peered into the darkness below. A chill that wasn't just cold climbed his spine. From the basement below, faint scratches echoed against the wooden walls like nails dragged slowly across a coffin lid. He swallowed hard. The journal had warned that those who ventured here often did not return, but the promise of understanding, of uncovering the truth, was too strong to resist. With a deep breath, he descended into the basement, unaware that each step drew him closer to a darkness that did more than wait. It hungered. The basement air was thick and oppressive, carrying a stench of rot and something Ethan couldn't quite identify, something almost alive. His flashlight trembled in his hand as he swept it across the walls. Strange symbols, etched deep into the wood, glimmered faintly, like they were aware of his presence. The floorboards beneath him groaned, though no one else was there. Ethan's gaze fell on a pile of decayed furniture pushed into the corner, and beyond it a dark stain stretched across the floor, spreading in an unnatural pattern. It wasn't just dirt or water. It looked like something had been dragged, or worse, something had tried to escape. The journal's warnings echoed in his mind. Thomas had described this place as the heart of the cabin, where the entity revealed itself. Then he felt it, a cold, crawling sensation along his spine, as if invisible hands brushed against him. Shadows began to detach from the walls, curling and stretching like smoke. The whispers returned, louder now, forming words he couldn't ignore. "You are ours. You cannot leave." Ethan stumbled back, tripping over debris, and the flashlight flickered violently. Reality itself seemed to warp. The walls in the basement stretched and pulsed, elongating into shapes that didn't exist, while the shadows twisted into humanoid forms. Ethan saw glimpses of those trapped here before him, figures frozen in silent agony, mouths open in screams that reached only his mind. Panic clawed at his chest. Every instinct screamed to run, but the cabin had already begun to trap him. The stairs he had descended now seemed impossibly far away, twisting into the darkness above. Desperate, he remembered Thomas's journal and the rituals described in its final pages, symbols meant to protect, chants to repel the entity, warnings about confronting it without preparation. Frantically, Ethan gathered dust, splinters, and anything he could use to mark the symbols Thomas had drawn. The whispers became screams, echoing around him, pressing on his sanity. "You belong here, forever." Ethan etched symbols into the floor with shaking hands, chanting lines from the journal. The shadows recoiled slightly, writhing as if in pain, but the entity was cunning. Shapes in the corners of the room coalesced into a massive humanoid figure, tall and faceless, its arms extending unnaturally, reaching toward him with endless patience. Its presence radiated hunger and malevolence. The temperature dropped so sharply that his breath fogged in the air. He realized then that the cabin was not just a building, it was alive. It fed on fear, on curiosity, on those who dared enter. The walls seemed to pulse with its heartbeat, the shadows stretching endlessly, the whispers twisting into commands. Every object, every corner seemed to watch him, react to him, toy with him. With no other option, Ethan steeled himself, chanting louder, focusing on the symbols. The shadows recoiled, screeching silently, and the figure hesitated, as if caught between dimensions. He only had moments. If he failed, the basement would consume him, and his soul would join the chorus of whispers forever. Every fiber of his being screamed that the cabin had only one rule: those who enter leave only as memories, as echoes. Ethan's hands were raw, his voice hoarse, but for now he had stalled the entity. There was a sliver of hope, an escape, but it lay beyond the twisting forest, through paths the cabin itself would try to erase. Ethan crawled through the narrow tunnel beneath the basement, every inch of his body slick with sweat. The whispers followed, seeping through the cracks in the walls, winding into his mind. "You cannot leave. You belong." The air grew colder, the walls pressing closer, as if the forest itself had stretched into the tunnel, determined to swallow him whole. When he finally emerged, the forest was unrecognizable. Trees twisted impossibly, their branches knotted like fingers reaching for him. Shadows clung to the ground, stretching unnaturally long, and the wind carried the faint, distorted echoes of laughter and cries from the cabin he had left behind. Ethan stumbled, nearly losing consciousness, but the journal in his hand reminded him of Thomas's final instructions. The entity could be stalled, if only briefly, by symbols drawn and chants repeated aloud. Heart pounding, he knelt in a small clearing. Drawing symbols in the dirt with trembling fingers, he recited the protective chants from memory. The shadows shrieked and recoiled, writhing as if in pain. From the corner of his eye, he glimpsed the cabin, or perhaps a memory of it, looming impossibly large, windows glowing like the eyes of a predator. The whispers became a chorus. "You can't escape! You can't escape!" Ethan forced himself to his feet and ran, sprinting through the warped forest, branches clawing at his clothes and skin. The path twisted, shifted, and sometimes disappeared entirely, as if the cabin itself reshaped the woods to trap him. His lungs burned, his legs ached, but every step carried him closer to the edge, closer to the world beyond the cabin's malevolent reach. Dawn broke, faint and gray, spilling light into the forest. He emerged at its edge, gasping for air, the trees behind him suddenly still and silent. In the clearing where he had begun, there was no trace of the cabin, only an empty space, as if it had never existed. Relief washed over him, though a nagging unease lingered. He clutched the journal tightly, the words of Thomas etched in his mind. "The cabin remembers those who leave." Ethan thought he had escaped, but even as he staggered toward the nearest road, he noticed shadows flickering at the periphery of his vision. Shapes that weren't there when he turned, whispers too faint to understand, but too persistent to ignore. The journal had warned that the cabin's grasp was patient. It did not release its victims easily. As he finally reached civilization, he dared to breathe freely. The sun's rays felt warm against his skin, the forest behind him silent, lifeless. Yet the whispers never fully faded, haunting the edges of his thoughts. When he glanced down at the journal one last time, a new page had appeared, scrawled in a handwriting not his own. "We remember and we wait. You will return." Ethan swallowed hard, a chill running down his spine. The cabin may have vanished, but it had left a piece of itself behind in him, a darkness that would linger, patient and relentless. Somewhere in the whispering woods, it waited for the next soul brave or foolish enough to enter. The story ends with a lingering dread, leaving the audience questioning, did Ethan truly escape, or is the cabin already claiming him in ways he cannot see?